the first show that I worked out on the computer and that I've already done, which was in Milan. Actually, I think the drawings are rather simpler here, looking at the more recent plans. In my fantasy, I think a little bit of early Renaissance paintings, the way that in those paintings they're actually quite poor in a way, in the sense of them trying to work out how to make an image, how to create some kind of reality with the tools that they had, which was some understanding of perspective. The computer seems to be sort of at a similar stage, or at least the way in which I use it. That it's not really a very good representation of reality, but it gives you the elements of reality, shadows, space. And in a sense, you can take liberties with it in the same way that perhaps Giotto did, in that for a Last Supper, they'd strip away the front wall so you could see what was happening inside, and that's what I've done here, is to strip away this wall, which, in fact, you can't see this view in the exhibition. You can only come in the door here or through the garden there. This exhibition had, if we look up again at the whole screen, there were 3 rooms. Oops, what's that for? Sorry. With a connecting lobby out here, so you could look into any of these 3 rooms. Each room held one main object and had one painting on the wall. Obviously, in these 2 cases, you've got buildings with landscapes behind, and in this case, I flipped the sense and brought the landscape into the space, i.e. these wooden trees here. And the building becomes painted on the wall. In fact, the room was much more filled with trees, but if I do something like it actually was, you can't see the house behind, which you kind of couldn't in the exhibition. You had to walk around these trees in order to see the house behind. So it was a bit like peering through the forest and seeing the tree in the distance. If you want to see the landscape without the church, it was something like that. Painted in normal wall paints that a gallery would normally be painted in, except that it's normally painted white. And the house is made of wood and painted with gloss paints, so in a certain sense the house could have come out of the landscape, but obviously it's physical in front of you. It seemed appropriate that when the object becomes physical, it somehow becomes shiny. In the last room, I just want to take that building out for a minute so you can see that. Milan is close to the mountains, and although for me a mountain landscape like that isn't particularly typical background, it seemed more possible there, and I wanted some variety of landscapes. As I said before, this one isn't taken from a painting, it's taken from a food label, but somehow that area of landscapes, fantasy, a kind of common fantasy of what the countryside is like from perhaps a kind of supermarket point of view, rather than exactly how it looks when you get out there, is closer to what I'm interested in or want to use in this case. This was a large wooden box, just painted with these grey, black, white shapes to give the impression of some kind of slight relief. Okay, so that was the first exhibition. I'll move to the exhibition that we're thinking of now, but perhaps return to other ones, because the idea of this whole project, in a sense, is to build up a kind of imaginary catalogue of objects and paintings that allows me to deal with different spaces because I find that the space that the exhibition is in is at least as powerful a reality, plus the space outside the gallery is also a powerful reality as the work that you put in it. And I became frustrated with finding that works really were appropriate for one space, but you put them in another space, they had a whole different meaning, or you mix them with different works and they had a whole different meaning. And I wanted to come up with something where, although that continued to be the case, that they had a different meaning, I was kind of in control of that different meaning. So I can, to some degree, create on the computer the space that is proposed for me to show in, and then pull from the memory of the computer various things that I either have built or would like to build, and see if I can construct out of those elements a further stage, another drawing. So it's like drawing with my own drawings, so that the exhibition itself becomes kind of like a work. So here in the CC, these are two images of the same building. Perhaps I should get rid of one of them. No, it doesn't want to do it. Yes, it does. This is possibility number one, which at the moment is losing ground rapidly as an option. The difference between this and the other ones is the paintings on the wall. So I can draw this space and then drop these objects in, just ungrouping the objects so that I can now move them individually. It's left its shadow behind. So I can draw this space empty, take them all out. Those should be grouped, really. Excuse me a second. So I've got the empty space, and I can then imagine, and because it's what I might put in it, because it's one space, and when you come in here, these are windows, this is a skylight, these are columns. When you come in, you see the whole space, and that's a very different and very particular experience. A lot of galleries that you show in, like the one I just showed you, there's a build-up of spaces, there's a narrative of going into one, coming out, going into another. It's a very different proposition. In this case, because you see the whole space at once, I didn't want to have lots of the same object, although it's possible. For instance, we could have a lot of red Peugeots, which might look dramatic. But hey, maybe I should do this. But I haven't got a lot of red Peugeots, for one thing. And I think that in a big space, to have one object repeated makes me a little nervous, because I know it can work, but it's relying on the power of repetition, which I'm suspicious of. Somehow it's too easy to get a strong impression by having thousands of something. It doesn't leave me really knowing any more about something. It's a bit vague, I know, but in the case of cars, it would make some sense, because you obviously often have a lot of cars, but perhaps that's true of everything. So anyway, I'm not going to do this. What I've decided to do in the case generally of large open spaces is to use the fact that I've noticed that people for sculpture generally don't stop moving, they just keep walking. And museums obviously ask that anyway. Obviously you walk quite a long way when you see an exhibition, but particularly I think in a sculpture exhibition. For paintings, people tend to move from painting to painting and stand in front of each painting for a short while. But here I'm imagining that people are going to come in and start walking quite quickly, and so I want to use that movement to create a kind of narrative, and I've tried to pick up on that sense of narrative both in the exhibition and in the catalogue for the exhibition. So here the narrative, which is just a simple one and in a certain sense of little importance, perhaps it's autobiographical, But in a way, it's more like the words of a song. It's a way of tying together the experience of seeing the exhibition, whilst I hope leaving the objects to individually stand as on their own, to be seen in a more conventional sense as sculptures, and likewise the paintings to be seen as sculptures. So perhaps if you entered here, you'd then slowly move around the back, and then perhaps come to the front again, and the story may be that you drive through a forest, past some homes, or from your home to work, past some office buildings. Maybe also you're on holiday and you're just a tourist and you're passing places of notable local interest, like a castle. All the time, this landscape surrounding and uniting the objects. So this is possibility number one. But as I say, at the moment, I'm not so sure about those landscapes. What I'm worried about with these ones is that the trees are also objects. So it means that you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or more, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, a lot of objects in here, and it maybe becomes hard to actually see what's going on. So other possibilities are perhaps this one. Sorry, I have to change this colour. Which is using, it's actually quite difficult to see as well, isn't it? Using a much more computerized, simplified landscape. I put the church in here, which is maybe a mistake. I'll take the church out just so that we've got similar drawings. We should move that over there then. But that don't actually have objects in these paintings, so it allows the objects to stand perhaps more individually and allow the paintings to sink back. So it's a little bit, in a way, I often think of it a bit like composing a song. It's not particularly the individual elements, the solo artists, but the way in which they go together. So I might have to sacrifice certain sculptures that I like or paintings that I like, because although I like them, they don't seem to work in the situation. Possibility number 3 is down here, which are the paintings more based on old style paintings, which obviously have a different kind of mood, much jollier mood. And at the moment I just can't decide. But I don't have to just yet. The catalogue that I mentioned uses a lot of memory, so it takes a long time to come on. So the catalogue, like all the work, tries to find an excuse for its existence in a way. So the exhibition's excuse for its existence is as a story, perhaps, even perhaps almost like a playground or somewhere for you to walk or something quite filmic. The excuse of the catalogue is more specific in the sense that I don't want to make something that is just a catalogue, because then it tends to look like a catalogue and you end up making all your catalogues looking like the same thing, a catalogue. So I've made some catalogues that look like trade catalogues, I've made catalogues that look like photo albums, and in this case I'm trying to make give it the look of a children's book, since this sort of narrative story line seems to be appropriate for that. So it's going to be made from cardboard. Let's make the screen a bit bigger, excuse me. This is the front cover, and this is the first inside page. It'll be made from quite thick cardboard, like children's books often are. And the individual pages will also be thick cardboard, and the corners will be rounded like that. And in a sense, the book is like a simple story, using the red Peugeot as the main character. And this Peugeot goes on an adventure, and the titles of the work often are used underneath. And when you put these titles together, they kind of go to build up a not particularly interesting, but a certain story, a certain kind of narrative, so that both you're walking through the gallery, and also if you happen to read the labels, the reading of the labels would give this sense that the works, although they may be there individually, are adding together, they're building up in a kind of line. So you've got You Are Driving Along, which is the title of the car, and You See a Church, which is the title of this church. But you could also have You See a Church, You Are Driving Along. You could flip the objects around, so in the same way in the exhibitions that I might flip the objects around and therefore change the narrative, so the titles that you can write these short sentences in, or short phrases, in any order you like. It doesn't really make that much difference. So I'll just flip through the pages for you here, so we can go a bit closer. So you're driving along in the country, you see a church and some trees, the roads are empty. You see the red Peugeot is on every page in one position or another. You pass a castle, which is the title of that work. There are hills in the distance, which is the title of one of the wall paintings. You approach a town, there are more cars. I've built this one, and I've built this one. This Volkswagen I'm in the process of building. I've lost a little bit here, hang on a second. And the Subaru I'm thinking of making. These buildings in the background are all taken from drawings that I've made in order to make sculptures. So by putting together a lot of drawings, you obviously get a town in the same way that putting together a lot of architects' work, you get a city. Putting together a lot of individual people's cars, you get a traffic jam. I like things like that. We're back out through the town into the suburbs again. You pass through the suburbs and see some homes. I've picked, these are actually English homes, and they're the very normal kind of homes that you see in the suburbs, where quite often they'll be built by some entrepreneur, and you can choose your house almost by the colour. And this fact allows me to remake the same sculpture. I've only made two actually, but I'd like to make some more, painting them as quite different paintings, using the fact that these homes are often the same homes but painted differently. Likewise with the cars, I can get, by basically creating the same sculpture, because those types exist, it gives me the option of a number of different cars. It's the same sculpture, but it's at the same time a different sculpture. Likewise with the buildings. If I can find a group like that, I'm much happier. I don't really want to, I'm not really that interested in making individual sculptures. Even if I only make one, it's got to somehow suggest that others could be made, that this is a kind of example, a possibility amongst many. Carry on. So you're back out through the suburbs into the country, you pass through a forest, there are mountains in the distance, and then the back page is basically the same as the front page, but at night. So I was hoping for some kind of sense of, I think it's called ennui, or perhaps boredom, or melancholy, that you get when you're driving and you're not particularly happy or you're not particularly sad, you're just driving and taking in what you see, but in a slightly subliminal sense because you're driving. So you may be glancing out of the window at occasions and you're aware that you're either in the suburbs or in the country, but it's more a sense of general awareness. It's not that you're actually stopping to look at any of these things. In fact, there's perhaps nothing here that you would stop to see except maybe the castle. They're more things that you pretty much find anywhere in Europe at least. Although I think that this book has ended up being somewhat the story of my visit here, in the sense that I'm out in the country, but every time I have to go and get anything or get anybody, I go through the suburbs and into the town, get the thing, and come back out through the country, often past a castle. to where I started. The church, though, isn't like any of the churches around here. It's actually a church from southern Germany. So I collect things wherever I am, usually via photography, and wait for a moment that I can use them. So that's going to be the catalogue. No. In the exhibition, there are 3 small rooms next to it, and that's often quite difficult when you've obviously got a main room. I won't just show you a blank screen. What shall I show you? I'll just show you one of the films that I'm about to talk about. When you've got a main room, that's obviously the core of the exhibition. To then use a smaller room can be very difficult in terms of the theatre of the exhibition, the timing of the exhibition. You don't want to distract people from the main room. You don't want to give them something that's basically the same, because that's just boring. On the other hand, if it's very different, maybe it's distracting. Somehow it's got to add to the experience of the main room. So what I thought of doing, and I hope that this succeeds in doing those things, is to show 3 computer films actually running on their computers in these 3 side rooms, all of which involve movement of different kinds, though in a sense, perhaps, although one is called Imagine You're Walking, they're kind of vehicular types of movement. And that maybe by showing these films which relate to the background paintings, it will suggest the way in which one might approach the main room. So I'll run this like this. This will be a film. Excuse me, just a second. But it will be more sophisticated than this, in the sense that the trees at the front will run fast, the ones in the middle a little slower, the ones in the background even slower, to give a kind of 3D effect. So I'm hoping it will run both smoother and more convincingly than this. But if you can imagine the computer just running endlessly like this, scrolling past, as if you were in a train looking out the window. And it's related to what are called in England screensavers, which just run on your computer when you're not using it, and usually show you something kind of boring, but at the same time slightly hypnotic. So this would be one film, which is obviously the template for the wall paintings. And as you can see, if I show you the whole image again, this could be of any length, really. It's just made up out of circles and arcs, which I can show you. And you can just add more of it. So if I do that, you can see that it's made up out of lots of, but fairly simple circles and arcs. And these can be, the background can be repeated ad infinitum. You can just drop trees in a random sense and create an endless landscape. So that would be one film. I can't show you the 2 other films because I haven't got them on my computer, but I can show you a film that won't be in the exhibition. But perhaps it gives an idea of how these things go. This is obviously related to the catalogue. It's a matter of trying to find the right moment between complete boredom and a kind of fascinating boredom. So I don't want anything to happen. I don't want any expectation that anything is going to happen. It's more like a static painting that happens to be moving, so that the movement doesn't actually create any narrative in the sense that you're going to get anywhere or that you're going to see anything different from what you've already seen. But there is movement nonetheless. So that movement, like in the exhibition, doesn't really have to imply a narrative with a beginning and an end, but there is a scrolling of time. So different things are presented to you. This reminds me of long-distance driving or long-distance traveling of any kind, that you start to lose any sense of coming from somewhere or going to anywhere. You're just aware of what's passing, and I very much like that feeling, that mood, the way in which you start to look at things when you're in that mood.